Welcome to Naturally par José, a podcast on health and well-being. I'm your host, José Fortin. Today, we are going to talk about menopause and the changes that take place in your body during this period. In the medical world, hormonal changes have been studied in depth for quite some time now, but it's only more recently that they are becoming aware that it's not just a question of hormonal balance. In terms of naturopathy, we have long realized that we need to work on several levels to restore homeostasis, not just on the reproductive system hormonal balance. It is important to say that menopause is not an illness, like some women seem to think, but rather it is a period in a woman's life where there is a definite cessation of fertility. Medically, a woman is declared to be in menopause when she goes 12 consecutive months without menstruations. For most women, this happens between the age of 45 and 55. On the other hand, there is about 5% of women who naturally enter menopause either before the age of 45 or after 55. When it happens before 45, we call it an early menopause. This is not an issue, but it is something you have to be a little bit more careful with because it seems that when estrogen level drops, we lose a little bit of its protective effect on the cardiovascular system. Women before menopause usually have lower risk of cardiovascular problems than men, but after menopause, the risks are about equivalent. So if you have an early menopause, that means your cardiovascular system becomes at about the same level of risk than men. And then you just have to be more careful to keep your cardiovascular system in good health. Some women can reach this period of life without having unpleasant symptoms if their body is in homeostasis, that is, in balance. However, many women experience the onset of symptoms related to menopausal change in the few years before the period completely stops, and these symptoms can persist for up to a few years afterwards. It's when the symptoms affect their everyday life that menopausal symptoms can become problematic. These symptoms can also change depending on the stage of menopause the woman is in. Premenopause is considered to be the period where women still have their periods, but those periods are beginning to change. Sometimes they can become irregular. In the beginning, can even be closer together and then later on further apart. And the intensity of bleeding can also vary. Perimenopause encompasses the period when periods becomes more spaced out, up to 2 years after periods completely stop. This period will be the main focus of this podcast. Postmenopause is the period after menstruation stops, and it continues until the end of a woman's life. Normally, the unpleasant symptoms of menopause tend to diminish and disappear within the 2 first years of postmenopause if the glandular system and nervous system of these women manage to find balance following the big hormonal changes. Unfortunately, for some women, symptoms can last much longer if their body cannot regain balance. I have seen women who still had menopausal symptoms 20 years after the cessation of their periods. We are going to make a quick side note here. When some women have a total hysterectomy, that is when they have their uterus and ovaries removed, they find themselves plunged suddenly, and I would even say brutally, into postmenopause. Their body has to work much harder to regain balance because this is not a smooth transition, but rather a big shock to the body. Before talking about perimenopause, the main topic of this podcast, I want to talk a little bit about premenopause and particularly the stage where most women start to see changes in their cycle. It is a phase that can be very different from what will happen afterwards and which can be very problematic. I still want to emphasize this a little because I do not want women who experience these symptoms to feel completely ignored. At the start of premenopause, there are many women who can often see an increase in intensity of their period and they last a lot longer. In some cases, they can become closer together like every 14 to 21 days. But I've even seen cases where they bleed basically every day. They have a period of maybe 3, 4, 5 days that are a lot more intensive. And then they keep having a light flow ongoing for the full month. They often have 2 periods of every bleeding during the month, but they do lose blood a little bit every day. In those cases, you have to be very careful because you're more at risk of developing a severe anemia. You have to know exactly why it's doing this. If there's an issue with your lining in your uterus, you have to know if there's a fibroids that's present in your uterus. It's very highly recommended to consult a doctor to really know what's going on. Hormonally, what can happen is that when the ovaries production in estrogen and progesterone drops in preparation for menopause, the body registers that the progesterone is going down, but because we're exposed to a lot of xenoestrogen in our environment, those are man-made chemicals that mimic the effect of estrogen in our body. Well, the body doesn't register the drop in estrogen as much. So there's a delay that happens, and it's the discrepancy between progesterone and estrogen level that cause these symptoms. It is about the same type of phenomenon that can be observed in younger women who have a lot of problem with their periods. Some will have very heavy menses, they are very short cycles, lots of bleeding, and it's the same principle. It's that their body's producing progesterone estrogen, but because we're overflown with xenoestrogen, it keeps those levels way too high. And that has consequences on the flow, on the frequency of the menses. It will also favor the development of uterine fibroids, endometriosis, and polycystic ovarian problems. It is very important to make sure you're followed by a doctor to keep an eye on the situation. I would also recommend that you listen to my first episode, which talks about xenoestrogens and how to reduce our exposure. Fortunately, during premenopause, the increase of these specific problem is temporary because when the hormonal levels are dropping significantly lower, these problems will also decrease. Now let's talk about perimenopause. In this phase, when women start to skip cycles, that is where most women will start seeing typical menopausal symptoms appear. Depending on the region of the world, the frequency of those symptoms may vary. Until now, the fluctuation has mainly been associated with diet, but as you will see, lifestyles also plays a big role in menopausal symptoms. Some meta-analysis collect information from several studies carried out in North America to obtain the following statistics. There is about 75 to 80% of postmenopausal women that have vasomotor symptoms. Those are symptoms relating to the dilation of blood vessels. In this category, we find symptoms such as hot flashes, night sweats, palpitations, and migraines. There's about 50 to 75% of postmenopausal women who experience genitourinary symptoms. They have symptoms such as reduced libido. They can have recurrent urinary infections due to a change in pH that is linked to the hormonal change of menopause. There's also an increase in urgency and urinary frequency when some women need to urinate much more often, but the amount of urine actually eliminated is small. They also can have a tendency towards vaginal dryness. Vaginal dryness is when the vaginal wall becomes thinner and fragile, which can be a source of pain during intimate relationships. 70% of women have psychogenic symptoms. These symptoms include increased mood swings, nervousness, irritability, anxiety, tension, depression, insomnia, as well as a decrease in concentration, self-esteem, and confidence. Most women do not have all of these symptoms at once, but they often have a combination of a few, and the intensity of the symptoms can greatly vary depending on each woman. So, what was the medical approach to menopause throughout the years? This will help us see what the doctor's idea of menopause, the type of research that was done, and the advancement towards helping women with severe symptoms. In the 1800s, women who showed marked symptoms during menopause were considered hysterical and mentally unstable, which was, according to most men, perfectly understandable due to the women's weak constitutions. Between us, men were clearly not involved enough in the birthing process because seeing a baby come out of a woman's body would have cured many of them from their superiority complex. In those times, doctors would give menopausal women with intense symptoms some opium, cannabis, or belladonna to help their hysteria. The doctors took care of the nerve of their patients, which is a very interesting approach if we consider the rest of the information you will receive in this podcast. It was in the 1930s that research into the hormonal phenomenon of menopause gained momentum, and it is in 1942 that the prescription of Premarin began. That estrogen is from an equine source, in other words, from horses. In those times, however, it was not very popular because it was extremely expensive and not easy of access. It took until 1970 before they developed new manufacturing process and the cost drastically decreased, which made it a lot more accessible to a lot of women. Between 1970 and 2002, hormone replacement therapy, HRT, became very popular. In 2002, new research came out that demonstrated two things. First, they demonstrated that there is not a significant correlation between decreasing estrogen levels and the intensity of menopausal symptoms. Many women who use hormone replacement therapy do not necessarily have a reduction in their unpleasant symptoms. Second, they also saw that there's a significant increase in the risk associated with the use of these hormones. There's quite a good risk of cardiovascular issues and also an increased risk of cancer. Because of that, it created a lot of controversy and the popularity of HRT dropped for a while. Since then, the medical system mitigated the risk of hormonal replacement therapy by turning towards bioidentical hormones. These hormones are produced from human hormones instead of equine hormones. However, it's important to remember that these are still synthetic hormones, so the risks are still the same. But because they're identical to what women produce in their body, we don't need to take as much of them to get some effect. Since the dosage is smaller, the risks are decreased accordingly. Meanwhile, because of the weak correlation between hormonal level and menopausal symptoms, many scientific researchers have attempted to find what is the real source of those menopausal symptoms. Dr. Lisa Masconi, one of the researchers that participated a lot in those studies, summarized that situation very well in the following extract. She says that we associate menopause with the ovaries, but when women say they have hot flashes, night sweats, insomnia, memory loss, depression, anxiety, these symptoms do not start in the ovaries. They start in the brain. These are neurological symptoms. Quick flashback to those doctors in the 1800s who treated women's hysteria. They still were looking in the right place, just with the wrong attitude and not the best solutions. I'm saying this because recently several studies have shown that there's a direct correlation between the concentration of neurotransmitters in the brain and the symptoms of menopause. Dr. Masconi helped determine that hot flashes or night sweats are associated with an imbalance of neurotransmitters in the hypothalamus, a gland that has an important role in controlling body temperature. Insomnia linked to menopause is believed to result from an imbalance of neurotransmitters in the brainstem. Mood changes would rather be linked to the concentration of neurotransmitters in the amygdala. That is part of your limbic zone, your center of emotions in your brain. Memory loss is linked to an imbalance of neurotransmitters in the hippocampus, the main memory center. Now that we have determined that there's a direct correlation between the concentration of neurotransmitter in the different areas of the brain and menopausal symptoms, let's look at what concretely happens during menopause. At the medical level, it was determined that the reduction in estrogen level has a direct impact on the concentration of neurotransmitters and their receptors, and that it is that decrease in neurotransmitters and receptors that is responsible for the appearance and intensity of menopausal symptoms. There are several neurotransmitters and receptors involved in this. There's norepinephrine, serotonin, dopamine, 5-HTP, acetylcholine, GABA, glutamate, acetylcholinesterase, adrenergic receptors, GABA receptors, muscarinic receptors, mu receptors, and serotonin receptors and transporters. So as you can see, there's a lot of different chemicals produced in your brain that can be unbalanced in menopause. So this is very complex, and trying to target one specific neurotransmitter for one specific symptom would be quite a challenge. At a naturopathic level, it's much simpler than that. It has long been observed that when there's an imbalance created by the hormonal change in menopause, it affects our capacity of maintaining homeostasis. And it's the adrenals that have a very important role to play in this. Often, by supporting the role of adrenals, we have a big impact in reducing the intensity and frequency of those symptoms. This goes exactly with what was found lately because your adrenals have a very important role to play in stress management and have an impact on your nervous system balance. So, if you have a lot of stress, when women reach menopause with exhausted adrenals, they have much more difficulty minimizing the stress impact on their nervous system, and it has a tendency to get out of balance a lot more easily. There are very few women who arrive at this stage of life without having to juggle multiple demands on their time. Very few make it to this stage with their adrenal in good shape. In addition, the nervous system already shows signs of imbalance. In these cases, it really increased the risk of presenting severe menopausal symptoms. This explains why the use of HRT does not necessarily calm unpleasant symptoms. If it is taken as soon as the symptoms appear at the beginning and the hormones do not decline too quickly, it may minimize the reduction in estrogen enough to eliminate the symptoms. However, if the decrease in hormones is too rapid, the adrenals are already exhausted, the nervous system is already out of balance. Even if you take hormones, you may no longer be able to reverse the situation. Once the neurotransmitters are on balance, if you just try to rebalance the hormonal levels, you might not have a decrease in menopausal symptoms intensity. What can we do to help our body restore homeostasis? You can work at different levels. First, it is important to ensure that the body does not reduce its hormonal production too drastically. By doing this, you will help reduce the negative impact of reduced hormones on the nervous system. To do that, phytoestrogens are natural elements found in our food and in certain plants that have a structural similarity to estrogen, but which, unlike xenoestrogens, would have a regulatory effect on estrogen levels. So, according to several quality studies, the regular consumption of phytoestrogen during menopause will help reduce the frequency and intensity of unwanted symptoms without increasing the risk of cancer. This can be a way to ensure a smoother transition and reduce the impact of these changes on the nervous system. Fermented soy, like tempeh, soya sauce, miso, and natto, is a particularly interesting source of phytoestrogens with a wide variety of health applications. Not only it has been shown to help with the hormonal balance during menopause, but it is also beneficial for the digestive and cardiovascular systems. In general, sources of dietary phytoestrogens are there's soy, even if it's not fermented soy, it still has a beneficial impact on the hormonal balance. Flaxseed, red clover sprouts, most legumes, like if you look at chickpeas, lentils, mung beans, fava beans, these all have a little bit of phytoestrogens. Sesame seeds, sunflower seeds, alfalfa sprouts, pistachio, peanuts, dried apricots, garlic, and peaches also have enough phytoestrogens to have an impact on the hormonal balance. By incorporating these food regularly in our diet, we can help have a smoother hormonal transition during menopause with fewer ups and downs. This helps greatly in reducing the negative impact on all these fluctuations on our nervous system, and it usually allows for a reduction in unwanted symptoms during menopause. Some soy supplements are available, but to have the same benefits than those foods, it would be preferable to consume supplements made from either fermented soy or alcohol-based extracts of the whole bean to have a similar effect on the body. This provides soy with a complete isoflavone profile. That means it has all the different types of isoflavone that is actually present in the soya bean. So a better balanced formula that have a better impact on the body. And it also eliminates lectins. Those are components that are usually responsible for the side effects of taking soy supplements. So if you have a better quality supplement, it will be a lot more effective. It is also important to reduce the impact that hormonal change has on your nervous system by helping with stress management in your body. Any significant hormonal changes have a direct impact on our nervous system through the stress axis. The hypothalamus, pituitary, and adrenal glands have a big role to play to make sure that your hormonal change that happens during menopause does not have a too big of an impact on the balance of your nervous system. Stress management is particularly important for women going through menopause. They are more vulnerable to imbalance because their body is already in transition from a state of fertility to a state of cessation of fertility. Any period of life where the body must adapt to a new reality, it experiences a period of greater internal stress. The body works really hard at keeping that balance or creating a new balance, and any external stress that happens during that period, it will amplify the impact it has on your nervous system. To reduce the amount of stress your body is exposed to will definitely help manage the neurotransmitter and receptor concentration in your nervous system a lot more efficiently. The pituitary gland is a key gland to manage the balance between our glandular system and our nervous system. During menopause, it works really hard to establish a new hormonal balance. It is being often overworked, and when it's overworked, it will tend to become overactive. The most common symptom of this is hyperideation. It's when you have a little hamster that runs in circle at full speed in your brain. The same ideas keep coming back all the time, and your brain works at a very high speed. Other symptoms that can also indicate that your pituitary is overstimulated are when you're having a lot of mood swings with heightened emotions, like a lot of anger, a lot of sadness, fear, etc. You can also have insomnia, particularly when it's the type of insomnia you wake up in the middle of the night and revisit the same thought, the same problems all the time. or you're making grocery lists in your head because you cannot sleep. That means your brain has difficulty shutting down. It will work overtime. When your pituitary gland is like that, there are many ways you can help calm it down and make it work more efficiently. Two things that are particularly interesting are, first of all, deep breathing. That's a technique that really helps calm your pituitary gland. And also, you can use a flowering oat supplement. In Latin, that's called Avena sativa. For more details on those two things, I do recommend you listen to my second episode on stress management. It will explain to you the proper way of doing deep breathing and also a little bit more details on flowering oat and stress management. As discussed, the adrenal glands have a major impact on the equilibrium of our glandular system and our nervous system. So, one way to reduce the symptoms of menopause is to reduce our consumption of stimulants because of their impact on our adrenals. Most women can observe a significant reduction in the intensity of their symptoms if they simply reduce their consumption of stimulant by about half. By stimulant, I mean sugar, caffeine, alcohol, chemical additives, nicotine. These are all substances that will trigger that same stress response as any other type of stress in your body. And if you stop bombarding your adrenals with those stimulants all the time, it will give them a chance to recuperate more easily. An excellent way to strengthen your adrenals and work on your level of neurotransmitters in the brain as well is by taking adaptogens. Those are plants that are particularly recognized for their effect on the neurotransmitter levels, the receptors levels, as well as on your adrenal health. The most popular during menopause are rhodiola, ashwagandha, and Siberian ginseng. Those are very interesting adaptogen to use in that specific phase of a woman's life. If you have a lot of hot flashes and night sweats, until you have a better hormonal balance, you can help manage them more efficiently if you reduce triggers that can set them off. Some of those triggers are spicy food. If you eat a lot of spicy food, you can have a lot more hot flashes. Very hot food or being in particularly hot spaces can also increase the frequency of your hot flashes and night sweats. They're not a cause, but they can be a trigger. In the beginning, until you have them under control, if you avoid those few things, just to give you a chance to keep that under control more easily. Many studies show that excessive weight can contribute to increasing the risk of unpleasant symptoms during menopause. As discussed in my stress management podcast, it's very important to be active, to use up all the sugar and oxygen liberated by your adrenal when they're under stress. This will also help reduce the intensity and the frequency of your menopausal symptoms. I know that when you start exercising and you're having a lot of flashes, it can be unpleasant at some level because being active, sweating can trigger more hot flashes. But as you will get more in shape and your body will be able to manage stress more efficiently, it will definitely help reduce the frequency and the intensity of your hot flashes. In general, the benefit of physical activity outweighs any discomfort you may experience initially. It is important to persevere and everything will gradually improve. The last little tip I'll give you is that some studies indicate that the use of vitamin E can be very interesting during menopause because it has been shown to possibly reduce the intensity of hot flashes during menopause and can have a protective effect on the cardiovascular system if we take it at a dose of 400 international units per day. But during menopause, what's very interesting and the most marked benefit is for vaginal dryness. In these cases, it's important, first of all, to buy a good quality of vitamin E gel cap so that the body can easily dissolve them with just body heat. Because the way to use it is to insert it vaginally at bedtime. You just insert one gel cap before you go to bed. And that way, during the night, the gel cap will slowly dissolve and the vitamin E will work on the vaginal wall in different ways. First of all, it has a moisturizing effect. It will help nourish the membrane so it doesn't thin out and it doesn't dry out as much. It also has a slight estrogenic effect. Vitamin E is known to be a light estrogen-like substance that can help maintain the hormonal balance at the membrane level. By doing this, usually women see an improvement in their vaginal wall inside a few weeks to a few months, depending on how advanced the situation is. Once you see it's improved, that it's much better, you do not need to do it every night. You can do maintenance by inserting a gel cap every 2 or 3 nights. So it doesn't need to be quite as frequent. Now that you're equipped with all this information, you can decide what to incorporate in your routine to achieve an harmonious menopause. You can choose what dietary change you can make, what exercises you can incorporate into your habits, and what relaxation technique to adopt. Even small changes here and there can contribute to your well being and can help reduce your unpleasant menopausal symptoms. Please keep in mind that any information contained in this podcast is not intended to replace your doctor's recommendations. If you have health conditions or are taking medications, it is important to consult your doctor to ensure that you can make the changes you wish to make without interfering with your medical treatment or any medications you are currently taking. Thank you for listening to the entire episode. If you like my content, please follow me or subscribe to the platform you use. You can also enable the notification bell to be notified when I upload a new episode, which will be every second Tuesday morning. Have a nice day.